Hi everybody, my name is Tamara and I did my systems modeling project on poverty in education. So first I'd like to go over some of the elements that poverty in education is made up of. First, government assistance. It greatly affects our school systems and their ability to teach and guide our youth. Things such as donations of school supplies, lunch programs, and educational programs for low-income areas are extremely important to those struggling in poverty. I think that this is most impactful in impoverished areas such as like full school districts, and also in third world countries that don't have access. So government assistance and foreign aid and volunteering is really important. Without that government funding or the help from nonprofit organizations, schools would and still do struggle. Income is also a factor of poverty in education. Your family status and how much money you make greatly affects your education. Even public schools require some sort of payment for education, and with families that struggle with money, sometimes paying that fee for admission is something that's not as important as, I don't know, say food or paying the electric bill that month. Not only does this apply for public schools, but also for higher education, so going to colleges and universities, eliminating that option of gaining a higher education for those with money issues. It's also been shown that children between the ages of 4 and 15 who live in higher income households have been shown to have better outcomes than those in lower income households. And then lastly, educational funding is also a super important element. So without proper textbooks or materials, teaching can be extremely difficult for not only the teachers, but the kids' ability to retain information as well. And to kind of talk about some interconnections, some of the interconnections of poverty in education are health, the classroom, and support systems. Health is something that greatly affects a child's education. When sick or malnourished, the brain functions slower and restrains your ability to learn and retain information. So having poor health is also something that lower income households are prone to, just because due to lack of insurance or access to doctors' offices and whatnot. The classroom affects learning abilities as well, thinking about the teacher's ability to control kids who are acting up or not paying attention, and the classroom size and atmosphere also plays a factor in that. Support systems are also necessary for a proper education. Having family members at home who know how to read and write can help with homework, super important for a child's ability to learn and study. Having teachers or guidance counselors at school also teaches kids proper social skills, and the neighborhood and friends of students also impacts a child's education. Just as an example, if you're living in an area of high violence, studying at home may be something that's impossible for children to focus on, and they also risk the chance of getting into some not so proactive things such as crime. And then kind of just to go over poverty facts and interrelatedness with everything. I know poverty is pretty self-explanatory, but just to kind of give a base run on what I did my systems modeling on. Poverty leads to poor health, decreased confidence, increased stress, a huge increase of child laboring and lack of education, and most importantly, crime. And it also leads to poor living conditions. So some of the quick solutions that we currently focus on doing is implementing government assistance, such as welfare, food stamps, unemployment, the use of loans. Some long-term solutions that we should be looking into more in depth would be education, raising the minimum wage, increasing paid leave and paid sick days, and then also implementing some adequate maternity leave so that mothers with newborns don't have to worry about babysitters or even the mother's health to just get back to work right away. So to kind of go over some stock and flows here, I know I'm going to zoom in a little bit because I know it's kind of out of focus. So I started up at the top with my stock and flows with poverty, and kind of down in the bottom right hand corner, you can see most of these lead to educational poverty. So if a poverty family, we'll go across the top first. Stress can be implemented from your family life. So if we're looking through the eyes of a child at school, their family life can cause them extreme amount of stress, and you can either lead to a burnout or you can lead to health issues. And granted, this isn't always, this is just a route that I decided to kind of look at after doing some research and seeing that a lot of impoverished families struggle with their health and their stress and school dropping out. So this is the route I took. So if we go from poverty, stressful family life at home causes stress, and then you either have a lack of nutrition or lack of access to health aid, such as insurance or doctor's office. Sometimes you can struggle with health issues. And when health issues arise, there's usually money issues involved because you have a lack of insurance. And sometimes, if that's the case, children who are currently in school sometimes feel the need to drop out so that they can start working and supporting their family or making ends meet. So that would lead to dropping out. There you have a lack of education, and then child laboring. So with that child laboring, you can either burn out, it leads right back to educational poverty for sure because you didn't get an education. And then it could also lead to crime due to coping mechanisms or other negative factors. So that's kind of just one route. But if you start back up at the top with poverty at the left again, right up here, and go down to education segregation. When I'm talking about that, I kind of just mean the income differences within social statuses of children in school. So if we think about racial differences or social status, things like that can really segregate the ability to learn for a student. So when we get down to educational segregation, then we can go into the government assistance. So with impoverished families, most of them, like I mentioned earlier, receive some sort of government assistance. And with that, you can go into dependency, where people just rely on that for their food stamps and welfare and unemployment checks. So when we get into there, then we still have the no money issue or money issues, leading back to poverty, leading back to educational poverty. So obviously with all of this, stress, welfare, dropping out, child laboring is going to be a huge issue. There we go. Okay. And then I also did a causal loop diagram just because it's, in my eyes, easier to visualize. So if we start in the middle with educational poverty, I kind of did 3 different loops. And if we start with that left loop that goes from education poverty to education, that's going to be one of our long-term solutions that we can look at. So by increasing the education of students and children in the US, but even the world, so in all cases of education poverty, by increasing this education, it's going to decrease child laborers, it's going to increase employment opportunities, and by increasing those employment opportunities, we increase the use of benefits, having health insurance, having different kind of, paid leave and sick days and maternity leave, those kind of things. With that increase of benefits, obviously we have an increase of income, which leads to lower stress, therefore having a higher life expectancy. So one of the articles that I read said that those who are in extreme poverty live live a shorter lifetime just because of all the stress and everything that goes into that. So that's kind of our one loop. And you can see that nonprofit organizations and government funding kind of go back into that education to help that system. If we go down from education poverty into support systems, we can see that that's also a different option for us. And granted, this is all very dependent on situations and areas and so many other things than just education poverty. But say we implement better support systems for students who are trying to get an education when they're in a low income area or family. By doing that, we can get students to have higher social skills. That's what I'm trying to say. So they would have lower social insecurities by having somebody to rely on, such as guidance counselors, parents, older siblings, somebody outside the family that can kind of just be a reminder of, I believe in you, you can do it, get that education. So we would decrease our social insecurities for those children, which would increase their ability to focus as well as retain information that they're learning. And by doing that, we can decrease this education segregation that's going on in the country. And that kind of just loops back into educational poverty. So I think that this is also a good system that we could implement for a long-term solution. But like I said, having a support system would be impacted in very different ways per person, per family, per area, per school district. I mean, that's so many other factors go into that. But then I wanted to also go into a quick solution, which would just be our short-term solutions, and we can see that at the right top hand loop. So going from educational poverty into welfare. So this government assistance, things such as food stamps, unemployment, all of those are going to be increased because it's going to be a dependent thing. So if everybody's receiving welfare just to get out of this impoverished area, we're going to be increasing our food stamps, increasing those unemployment checks, increasing dependency on those so that parents or children who are currently working while getting an education can either work for their own money for other things or put it towards something else, because if you're receiving money for food, you're not going to be making money to also put towards food, if that makes sense. So we're going to be increasing the dependency, which could also increase our short-term employment, just because if you're already receiving money for food, for unemployment checks, things like that, like I said, you're going to be putting your money elsewhere. You might not be as dedicated to your job because you're receiving assistance already. So this could lead to higher short-term employments for impoverished families, and then just go back into that educational poverty. Kind of like I was saying in my stock and flow diagram, kids who have really bad poverty family issues can get stressed, drop out of school, and then they feel the need to help support the family. So really, that's kind of like a parental loop, because obviously children in educated areas aren't going to be receiving welfare themselves, but that can just show how it impacts the student's ability to learn. So then, kind of just to sum it up, the solutions that we have is we're really just want to strive for education equality. It will delete that educational segregation issue that we have, and it'll increase the students' ability to learn, to create opportunities, to have better health care. Studies show that once you get a high school degree and up, so college education as well, but as long as you have a high school education, you have increased income, benefits, decreased stress, and you decrease those poor living conditions. And there's just so many benefits for long-term solutions, such as educating our youth. And then these are some of the sources that I used, and that is it. So thank you.